All right. Hello. Welcome to this evening. I am Christiana Limniatis. This is our Heritage Fund information session for the fiscal year 2025 grant cycle. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sorry, just some technical things on the screen. Just a little housekeeping before we get to the topic tonight. As you can see, we are recording this session, which we made available on the website later and to share with the rest of your team if they're not able to join us tonight. We will be saving all questions to the end of the evening. So if you have any questions that pop into your head throughout the presentation, just go ahead and enter those in the Q&A box so I can answer them live later at the end of the program. There is the webinar chat. You're more than welcome to use that for comments or other things, but since it is just me here tonight manning this Zoom room, if you have questions that you want me to answer live, please make sure to put them in the Q&A. And feel free to put those in as you think of them. You don't have to wait to the end. And then, oh, the chat is disabled. So maybe there is no chatting in the chat. If you give me 1 second, I think I can fix that quickly. And there we go. That should be fixed now. Thank you very much for letting me know about that. All right. So tonight, this program, we are going to talk about these things, right? Heritage Fund, but we're going to go over the program summary. We're going to go over the eligibility requirements, the application process, the program timeline. So from now till awarding, how does that work? And then we'll have that Q&A session at the end. All right, and the other thing important to keep in mind is that everything I'm going to tell you tonight is not new or brand new information or hidden information. Everything that we're going to review tonight is already available on the Preservation Maryland website. Our grant making page for the Heritage Fund is that link that you see at the bottom. If you go to our main page, you're going to go to that Our Work heading and see grant making, and there you'll take you to the Heritage Fund information. So information on that page itself and all the links to everything that you need and everything that we're going to go over tonight. All right, with that, let's begin. What is Heritage Fund? Heritage Fund is a cooperative effort, a joint program between Preservation Maryland and MHT, Maryland Historical Trust, your state historic preservation office. Heritage Fund was established in 1996 with both of our organizations contributing that seed money to create the fund. And while the program is a partnership between the two of us, it is Preservation Maryland, specifically me, Christiana, who manages the day-to-day of the grant application and grant program. So not only will you be speaking with me or Preservation Maryland staff person through this application process, but if you are awarded a grant and then through that process and closing out, that is all still going to be with me and with Preservation Maryland staff. Direct assistance. The Heritage Fund provides direct assistance for the protection of endangered cultural resources. It promotes the innovative demonstrative projects that can be successfully replicated to meet Maryland's historic preservation needs. The spirit and intent of the program is to serve the needs of tangible cultural resources that might not be supported through other existing avenues and funding resources. So we want to make sure that we're providing equitable access to preservation funding through this grant. Simple and fast, we kind of prided on ourselves that of other preservation funding that might be available to you, that our application process and in general program is pretty simple and straightforward to the point. We have a shorter window, a fairly short window for the application process, fairly quick turnaround on that application itself. The materials and information we're asking is, not as elaborate as other grant programs can offer. So again, that's something that we really take and are mindful of. So certainly if you feel differently, I would love to hear that feedback so we can make sure that we're always making this as accessible a grant program as possible. And lastly, important to understand that this is an independent review as part of this grant program. So while I may be managing the day-to-day activities of the grant and working with you guys to answer any questions you have during the application process, the final award determinations is made by a selection committee with representatives from both Preservation Maryland and MHT, non-staff positions. They are, a nominated board member type people to make these experts in the field to help us determine these awards. So it's not me that's making it, it is our selection committee. For a relatively small program, the Heritage Fund has had a significant major impact. Next year will be our 30th anniversary. So far, we've awarded nearly $2 million to projects across Maryland. That in turn leveraged near over $22 million in project dollars and went to 496 projects. Again, in our upcoming anniversary year, we will be hitting that $2 million awarded mark, which is amazing, and we'll be hitting our 500th project. So really excited to get this round off the books or off and running. The map that you see on the screen is accessible on our website on the Heritage Fund page. It actually only shows the projects back to 2016, and we're slowly adding more and more to go back all the way to 1996. So you can just visually see that impact we've had. All right, available funding and grant terms. As far as previously, Heritage Fund has had multiple rounds in a single calendar year, and we are no longer taking that approach. So there will be one funding cycle in funding year 2025. So if you're not able to submit an application that's due in March, you'll have to wait till next year to apply for the funding. This round, we have 126,500 available to disperse. So each year, it kind of, depending on the awards and asks, that can be anywhere from 12, 13 to 17, 18, 19 projects. In that range is usually what we're able to afford. Grant awards typically range from $1,000 to $10,000. So $1,000 is the minimum ask, $10,000 is the max award amount. There is a required match, a 10% match that needs to be reflected in your budget. And that can be cash or in kind. So if you have professionals donating their skills or time as part of that project, that can be used as a match. It doesn't just have to be cash. Work where applicable, mostly for our brick and mortar projects. You need to make sure that your project is in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. That isn't necessarily something that you have to work hard for. Most projects, just because of the details of that project, they might already be landmarked, or the other funding that you're using might require reviews, but you just need to make sure that if you are doing a brick and mortar project, that your consultants are aware that the work has to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. A major aspect of this grant program is that it is a reimbursable grant. So if you are awarded at the end of all of this a $10,000 grant award, you will not be receiving a check for $10,000 right away. It's reimbursable. So then you need to complete the project, complete that work that you put in the application that the funding was going to support. And once that's completed, you submit your disbursement and grant closeout paperwork. And at that time, once that's reviewed, then you'll be issued a check for your grant award. So please keep that in mind as your project planning. You will not receive the funding up front. It is a reimbursable grant. And then projects need to be completed within 1 year of the award. If they are not completed within a year, the project may be recalled so that we can put that award back into the pot and provide that funding in a future grant cycle. That being said, and we'll talk about this again later on, we completely understand that projects get delayed. Things happen, projects take longer than what you plan them to be. That's perfectly fine. We just need to be in communication, and I need to be aware that there are delays and the project is going to take longer. perfectly fine. It's for those projects that are not keeping us in the loop on what's going on, and don't seem to be moving at all, that we reserve the right to recall that award. On to eligible projects. So first and foremost, the Heritage Fund is only open to nonprofit organizations, including religious institutions. So religious institutions are acceptable. There's some other grant programs that don't allow that, but we do. So it's nonprofit organizations of all stripes and units of government. We are not open to private property owners or homeowners, unfortunately, at this time. And then it's really helpful to think of Heritage Fund as a project-based grant program, right? A project-based, place-based program. So we are not necessarily funding you, your organization, we are funding the project that you're undertaking. And so those projects can be divided into 3 general categories. This is a widely defined eligible projects list. There are many, many, many types of preservation projects that are included and eligible for funding. And these are just kind of the general categories that we kind of fit all of those topics into. So there's education and research projects, planning and feasibility projects, repair and rehabilitation projects. Let's talk about those a little bit more. When we talk about education and research projects, these are typically the projects that support preservation and education activities aimed at the public, with particular interest in programs aimed at reaching new audiences or projects that employ innovative techniques. Some representative education and research projects include the development and installation of historic markers, creating brochures or visitor guides. Again, it's creating those educational opportunities, those outreach opportunities for the public to engage in your preservation site, your preservation topic, whatever that preservation thing is. Here on the screen, you can see an example from a 2018 awardee. Downtown Frederick Partnership developed several brochures as part of their their preservation education toolkit. So their project was to create these materials for residents and property owners to educate them on historic preservation policies. I think that somebody's having issues with the image. It's just a screenshot of their brochure, just showing that. If you have questions about that, I can certainly provide an email with a copy of that. And it should be on the Downtown Frederick Partnership's website. So that is education research examples. Again, those are just representative examples of projects that fit in that category. There are certainly more projects that would fit in that category. Onto planning and feasibility projects. These typically refer to the projects that involve hiring a qualified consultant to complete either necessary reports, studies, plans, whatever technical documents are needed to support a preservation project or support an organization to complete those preservation projects. On the screen, you can see a picture of the 2019 recipient, Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area, who used their funding to create a visitor experience plan for their brand new, at that time, visitor center. But other example projects include feasibility studies, architectural plans. These are going to be your National Register nominations, your historic context statements, preservation plans, rehabilitation plans, all of those types of things, but also organizational plans, right? If you are an organization that's in a moment of transition and maybe you need some board development or strategic plans done, this funding could help support that as well. And then last bucket of eligible projects is that repair and rehabilitation. I think this is a little bit more straightforward to understand. It's all of those physical repair projects that involve our historic resources, capital projects. So again, restoration on a brick and mortar building like this. And we see the 22 recipient for, what is this, Somerset County Historical Trust. It can also include, repairs to, things involving landscapes and natural resources as well. And it also includes the services associated with our built environment. So this could be legal services engaged to advocate for the saving of a building, or designating a landmark if you're hitting legal roadblocks for whatever reason. This is money that could be used to help that resource too, to physically preserve that resource. All right, so those are those three kind of general project genres that we fund. And again, those are just representative projects. There are certainly more topics out there that fall within those. All right, on to criteria for grant awards. So like I said before, we have our selection committee that reviews and makes award determinations. They review those projects and make those determinations based on the criteria listed in front of you. On the website, like I said, way at the beginning of the program, the scoring and grading rubric is available to access. So you'll be able to see that form that the selection committee is actually using themselves to grade these. So there are 10 criteria and then a couple other points of consideration and extra credit type things. But these are the ones that they're grading you on, and that will be used in evaluating and determining your award. So they look at the relative historical and cultural significance of the resource, the urgency of the financial need, the extent to which the project provides long-term resource preservation, whether or not it stimulates or promotes other preservation activities, and so on and so forth. Why is this important? Again, this is how they are reviewing and determining the awards for the program. So when you're submitting your application, you want to make sure that you're speaking to these criteria and highlighting how your project successfully meets these criteria. When you look at the application form, there are some questions that are very specifically and to the point addressing one or more of these criteria. And there's other questions that are a bit more nuanced and are looking for more information on how you meet these criteria. So it's really important to make sure that you review this and consider these criteria in relationship to your application. All right, now on to the application process. This is a fully online application form. There are no PDFs to fill in. As far as the form goes, you're not emailing me anything. You are not mailing me anything. Everything is online. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see it's just a screen grab from the website. That red button, the first button on the page, FY25 Heritage Fund application, that will bring you to the program that we use. It's called Smarter Select. It'll bring you to that website and you'll see a page that looks like the right hand of the screen. On that page, if you've applied previously for a Heritage Fund application or submitted the closeout paperwork, you will already have a login and hopefully your computer has saved that information for you, or you've written it down somewhere, or you'll need to create an account to be able to access the form. If you want to look at the questions before you start the form, that's perfectly fine. And at the bottom of that main screen that you'll open on the application form, there's a little preview button at the bottom. I have the orange pointer pointing at it, the arrow pointing at it. You can click that and it'll generate a preview of the questions for you, so you can get an idea of what information that you need to gather. Again, it's a pretty straightforward application process, nothing unreasonable being asked of, but you can generate that preview of questions on the page before you log in and create an application form. When you open the application form, it's going to look similar to the left-hand side of the screen. The first part of the application is just a series of questions like this, check boxes, yes or no, short answer, fill in the blank type stuff. It's organized with these 5 sections. First is the applicant information. So that's information about your organization, the organization or government that's applying for the grant, and then information about that contact person, the person that is at that organization or unit of government who will serve as the official contact for the grant moving forward. So all of that information will get into that section. Project information is asking information about your proposed grant project. There's a series of questions about that. The next section is the property owner information. If you are submitting a project that involves a singular site or campus, especially for those repair and rehabilitation projects, right? So we need information about the building that you're going to be working on. Just basic facts. Where is it located? How big is it? Things of that nature. Has it been designated? And then also in the event that the property in question is not owned by the organization applying for the grant, that's also space there for information about the property owner to be put in there. An example of what I'm speaking about is that maybe you're a Friends of group, you're Friends of the Historic Cemetery, for instance, and your offices and visitors center is in the former chapel of the cemetery. You could apply for money to do work on that building, but you're not necessarily the property owner. So we would need to have information about who owns that chapel, who owns the cemetery, to make sure that they are approving of this project and accepting of this funding being spent on that building. The next section is project budget. So it's fill in the blank information about, how much is your project budget, and just a summary of what is your budget, how are you, what money are you using, and just a narrative explanation of the budget. And then that last section is going to be attachments and uploads. So it's your attachments and supplemental materials. In addition to the, answers, the narrative answers about what your project is and why you need this money and all of that jazz, we need these documentations. We need a copy of your IRS determination letter of tax exempt status. Everybody's, every organization's a little bit different and might have a little weird origination story. So sometimes that doesn't necessarily look like one nice clean piece of paper from the IRS. It might be a couple of documentations, whatever that takes. We just need confirmation that you are a nonprofit organization, or if you're a unit of government, just confirmation that you are a unit of government. We need 2 to 3 representative photographs. These are going to be the photographs that we use in traditional and social media to publicize and raise awareness about Heritage Fund and your project. So again, if it's a brick and mortar project, obviously a pretty picture of the building or something like that. If it's something more people-oriented, just representative photographs of your organization at work or things of that. Just pick nice, good pictures that we'll be able to use in media. A financial statement, audit, or year-to-date budget documents. Every organization is different. We get applications from quite large, older organizations that have more substantial and official annual financial statements or audits. You can give that copy to us. Or there are smaller organizations and newer organizations that might not have those types of documents. And you might have just, a budget document showing what your budget is this year or last year, or a statement of accounts. Whatever that document is that can show to us that you have money or are able to manage your money. If we are providing you this grant, we want to make sure that you have the financial systems in place that you'll be able to properly process that money and do what you need to do with it at the end, and that you'll be able to successfully complete your project. So it's not that we are looking that you have money or this amount of money or something like that. It's more just that we're confirming that you have those internal policies and procedures, financial policies and procedures, to be able to support completing and being successful in your application. Project letter of support. We ask for at least one letter of support it could be from an elected official, from a project partner or supporter, just some letter of support from someone in the community close to you that speaks to why this project is important and that they support providing you that award. Again, I think in previous grant cycles, the request was that it needed to be from an elected official. That is no longer the requirement. It just needs to be someone, it could be an elected official or a community partner, someone who's trusted and a partner in the community that can speak to the importance and need of this project. Project budget. So there is a section in the application where there's narrative and fill in the blank questions about your project budget, but we want you to also then upload, a spreadsheet version of your budget. That project budget should include both expenses and income. It should be a full project budget. And so when you have that income, that should, also reflect the request of, if you're asking us for $10,000, we should be able to see, how that $10,000 is going to impact the budget, what other funding you might need to be receiving, and things like that. Relevant plans, estimates, and proposals. Again, this will be dependent and different for every application that's submitted, but there is space for you to provide that. So if you are doing a survey project, you're hiring a consultant to do a survey for a potential historic district, a quote or proposal from that consultant providing the details of what that project would entail, that would be a great thing to include and upload. If you're doing a brick and mortar project and you're hiring a mason to repoint a building, the quote from the mason, so that we have a more specific idea, from their minds, what is that project going to include? Those types of things. And then lastly, letter of support from the property owner. Again, this is only in the event that you are doing a project that involves a single building or single campus, and you do not own that single building or campus. We need a letter of support from that property owner saying that they are okay for you to ask for this money and for this money to be spent to improve their resource. All right, so that is the application. Very quick rundown through that. On to program timeline. So the application became available that first week of January on the website. Today is January 22nd, our information session. New this year, we have added two Heritage Fund office hours, one in February and one in March. That will be, as it states, an hour of time on those 2 days. That's just kind of an open office hours where you can pop into the Zoom room with specific questions about your project, whether it's eligible, if you haven't started your application already, or maybe you've started your application and have some confusion about documents or something of that nature. You can pop in, ask your question, and then pop out. They will not be structured programs. Then that brings us to March 28th, the application deadline. The system is set to close applications at 11:59 midnight. So you'll have not just till the end of business day, but to the end of the day on Friday, March 28th. Applications will then be processed by staff, me, reviewed by the selection committee, and then we anticipate making award notifications at the beginning of May to the awardees, and then a public announcement at the end of May. May is Preservation Month, so we like to typically close out the month with the celebration of who has been awarded funds. Once you're awarded, if you are awarded, you will receive a letter from us announcing that you've been awarded, and then you will need to do a couple of things quickly. You'll need to submit a completed acceptance form and a copy of your W-9. Your acceptance form is where you again confirm that you agree to the terms of the grant program, the things that we've already mentioned, how it's a reimbursable grant and things like that. And then the W-9, we can't pay you unless we have a W-9 on file, so we need to make sure we have that before we get near that opportunity. Again, that year clock starts with the awarding of the grant. Again, if it takes longer than a year, that's okay. You just got to talk to me and keep me in the loop. As part of this, in receiving funds through this program, Preservation Maryland and Maryland Historical Trust need to be credited. So any mention of when talking about this project and publicity around your project, you need to include that line that funding for this project was provided in part by Preservation Maryland and Maryland Historical Trust. We can provide logos for you as well if you'd like to incorporate the logos of our organizations into the materials. That often happens with wayfaring signs and materials of that. So just let me know if you need a copy of our logos. And then lastly, remembering, which we've already talked about, This is a reimbursable grant. We do not pay out until the project is completed. There are instances where we have approved partial payments, especially in situations where an organization might not have the cash flow available to make the project happen all at once. So we have had situations where someone has gone halfway through the project, submitted the documentation for the money that was spent so far, and then we've issued that partial payment. And then they came through when the project was completed and did that final request. If we do, partial payments are available. They're dependent on a review and not guaranteed. Processing payments and closeouts take a significant amount of staff time. So again, we definitely, if you are in need of doing a partial payment, we respectfully ask that you only request at the halfway mark, one partial payment, just because of the staff time that's involved in processing those. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, a match is required, a 10% match is required. That needs to be either cash or in kind match. And then again, where applicable, your project needs to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. As long as you follow all those things, everything will be great, and you continue down the road, finish your project, and then you could be one of these smiling faces in this big check photograph. When your project is complete, you submit your disbursement request. That form is available on our website all the way at the bottom. There's a little blue button that says disbursement request. So you'll be able to submit that, and then I come out with a fancy big check and we take a fun photograph. Again, keep in touch with me. Let me know how the project is going, especially when you're hitting roadblocks, but not just when you're hitting roadblocks. This program isn't just about giving you the financial support that you need to complete this project. As your statewide historic preservation organization, it is incredibly important for us that you have the tools and resources that you need to complete your preservation project. So our help through the Heritage Fund does not stop at just providing you the money for it. If you have questions about how to complete the project, have questions about other projects, pick up the phone and call me, and I can provide you that technical assistance. If I don't have the answer, we can find you the person that has that answer. So again, throughout this project, it's not just about me giving you a check and that's our only relationship. We're here to support in any way that we can. So please stay in touch. Before we get to the questions that I've been seeing coming through in the Q&A, we'll just go over some usual frequently asked questions. So first, can individuals or private businesses apply? Again, no. The grant is only available to units of local government and nonprofit organizations. Can I apply for the work that has already been completed? And no, unfortunately. This work needs to be pre-approved as part of the application process. Work done before the application was submitted is not eligible as part of this project. If you have a project that has already begun, let's say you're doing a really big rehabilitation project, the overall rehabilitation project may have started, but there's certain aspects of the project that might not have yet. You could apply for funding to support that aspect of it, but to just support money for the overall project, that's not exactly kosher. So for example, you're doing a rehabilitation project, you're doing the stabilization first, and you have a couple of windows that are gonna need a little bit more special treatment. You could apply to have the windows repaired. You could apply to have that funding specifically on that work that has not been completed yet. Can I use this grant for a match to another grant? Yes, of course. Let's use money to help money. You can match, but you cannot use the match to grant match. You cannot use the, excuse me, I can speak. You cannot be used to match other money that you get from Preservation Maryland if you've received money from us, or certain programs through MHT. It does not include the Heritage Area program. You can apply and use the Heritage Area funds and our Heritage funds together. But the big MHT grant programs are not able to match for this program. And then how many times can we apply? There is no limit. There is no limit to how many times you can come to this well. You can get awarded a grant this year and reapply next year for a different project. That is something that the selection committee does take into account. and are just aware of in the review process. So just keep that in mind, that if you have been a recipient multiple times previously, that in the attempt to make sure that the funding is equitably awarded across the state, there might be tough decisions about someone who has already received funds and an organization that has never received heritage funds. So just keep that in mind. But no, you are more than welcome to apply every year. There's no restriction on that. And then we've talked about the Secretary of the Interior, or I've mentioned the Secretary of the Interior standards a couple of times, and I just want to briefly explain what that is for those that do not know, because it is very important to be aware of if you're in preservation. When we talk about physical preservation work on buildings, we kind of use the words preserve, rehab, restore kind of interchangeably. But technically speaking, in the preservation world, those refer to 4 different but overlapping treatments for historic properties. So the National Park Service, the Secretary of the Interior, has created standards for what it means to preserve a building versus rehabilitating it versus restoring it versus reconstructing it. So each of those treatments have a set of standards and guidelines explaining what does it mean to preserve a building versus what does it mean to rehab it. If you are doing a project with our money and it is applicable to the project, whatever treatment that you are choosing, whatever is coming with your project, we need to make sure that it fits with the standards of that. Most preservation projects follow the standards of rehabilitation, but there are projects that use other treatments. So again, just making sure that your work is in compliance and in accordance with whatever treatment is applicable to your project. For the non-brick and mortar projects, there are still resources from the National Park Service that help guide those projects. For most of those projects, you're going to be hiring a consultant who already knows and will be using those. So you might not necessarily need to be reading and studying up on them, but for you as an organization to be the best client that you can and be the best steward supporting preservation, I'd really recommend checking out some of the publications of the National Register of Historic Places. There are things called preservation briefs and other guideline documents that help explain how to do National Register nominations, how to do historic context statements, how to do cultural landscape reports, all of those reporting and document survey stuff, there's guides on that, and it's available on the National Park Service's website. And with that, we are going to start taking some questions. Thank you so very much, everybody. Here is one that is one of the financial statements can be a profit loss statement. Can that be simplified? Can that simply be included on the letterhead stationery? Yes, definitely would include any of the documents that you're uploading as part of your application to be on letterhead, if only to avoid any issues in my downloading them and processing your application. You know, God forbid I get folders mixed up or something. If your documentation is PDF'd and on letterhead, then there's no issues mixing your documentation up with anyone else. But yes, if you are, you know, a smaller organization, I think last year in Heritage Fund, I got, you know, pretty much split down the line. I either got a very professional annual financial audit document, or I got a QuickBooks profit and loss printout. Both were fine documents. So again, anything in that realm is fine. The point of why we're asking is not to verify that you have money or make sure that you're over a certain bracket or anything like that. It is just to make sure that you are in the practice of having proper financial management and monitoring and things of that nature. I think that answered that question. What is the average grant award size? So the typical award is anywhere from $2,000 to I think $8,000 when I ran the numbers last year. So it is really wide range. There isn't kind of a set number. We receive grant requests of all different values. The max award is $10,000, and a lot of people submit applications asking for that full 10. But there are still a lot of projects that get submitted that ask for less than that. So even though they've only been awarded $2,000, that was the full ask that they requested. So again, the numbers kind of get a little skewed by that way, but in the mix there. We also oftentimes, in wanting to maximize the amount of funding that we have in a year and maximize the reach of that funding, there are times where we will partially fund a project. So last year, I think out of the 17 awarded projects, I think 3 or 4 of them were only partially awarded, where they asked for, for example, maybe they asked for $10,000, but we were only able to award them, 7 or 8,000, something like that. But for the most part, we do typically fully fund the projects that we fund. Are those considered state funds? We need to secure non-state funds as a match for another grant. The Heritage Fund, so this question is that they have another grant and they have to secure non-state funds as a match, and they want to know if maybe the Heritage Fund might work for that. I do think that it would probably work. I mean, not knowing the specifics, and you're definitely encourage you to shoot me an email or give me a phone call and we can talk about it. But I don't think that our money does not count as state money, even though MHT is part of this grant program, and we report to them annually to tell them how much, what's going on with the money and stuff. I don't think that we are non-state funds. So I think that should be good to go. But again, definitely shoot me an email with the specifics of that to be sure. Next question, would research, image search, brochure, and website redesign for the hidden history of a site be eligible for the education and research bucket? 1000% yes, that is a perfect example of a project. And again, when we have those buckets, it's not necessarily that you have to, I mean, I ask on the application form which bucket yours fits into. Even if you click one, but it might actually, it's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of labeling. But yes, researching researching the historic significance of a site or a resource, taking that research and turning it into something that is more accessible to the public, 100%, that is projects that we would love to see. Next question, historically, approximately what percentage of applications received are awarded? That is an excellent question that I actually have been meaning to do the numbers on. So I don't have historic numbers on what the application rate is. And also those numbers will get a little messy because we previously had multiple rounds in a single year. But I will say that last year we received the most applications received in a single cycle. It was 51 applications, and we were able to fund 17 projects. We only have a set amount of money every year that we can award out. So this year we're at 126,000. It goes far, but not far enough. So, and just from the interest that I've received so far, I definitely think we're going to have a similar number of applications this year. Is a letter of inquiry required? No, the application is live and open right now. I checked yesterday, 14 individuals have already opened and started applications. So no, there's no intermediate step. The application is live. Go forth and fill out and submit. Also, strongly encourage that you do not wait until the deadline. I totally get it. I'm also a nonprofit. It's hard sometimes to work in that time before the week it's due. But for those that are applying before the week that it's due, I will be able to have that time to review your application once I receive it, and do a preliminary review to make sure that all of the necessary information is included. And so when people apply before the last minute crush, I have the ability to do that to make sure that your application is as complete as possible. So again, apply early, get that in so that we make sure that what goes to the selection committee is the most complete and successful application that you can put forth. Another question is there a set hourly rate for in-kind hours? No, that would be dependent on what your in-kind work. That's dependent on to you and the person donating those in-kind service hours. If the in-kind hours are, volunteer services, For example, I think it was last year before, previously an application was going to do a cemetery cleanup, and they were going to pay, it was a pretty overgrown cemetery, and they were going to pay their volunteers for their time. Or the volunteers were donating their time, and so they calculated it as minimum wage hours. So they had 20 volunteers working for 10 hours at minimum wage. That was the value of that work, because if they had to pay someone, that was probably what they were going to pay. If you have an architect or an engineer or a preservation consultant who is donating their services, it's going to be whatever their quote is, whatever they would charge for that service. So there's no set number or rate for in-kind. It's what you say the in-kind cost. Other question, a historic vessel boat that is privately owned, but the nonprofit is set for assisting the vessel is okay. Or does the nonprofit need to own the vessel? Okay, so whether it's, no matter what type of historic resource it is, whether it is a building, a boat, a bridge, a monument, if whatever your project involves is not owned by that applicant, by that nonprofit or that government, then we need a letter of support from that property owner saying that they are okay and aware of your project and will comply with whatever rules as part of this thing. So that's fine if it's privately owned. The one thing about that, though, is that if we go back to the criteria and you look at that criteria and scoring rubric form, there is consideration paid to public access to whatever is receiving this funding. So if you're requesting support, a grant award to support a project that the public has no interaction to, that's going to be graded and evaluated in a different way than a project that will have public access. That is definitely something that is important to the selection committee. So just keep that in mind. But it is fine if whatever your project is privately owned. An example of that from a long time ago project, it was a historical society, I think it was, and they rented space in a building on their main street. And so they had like a 99-year lease with that property owner. And they wanted to do some improvements to the building, exhibit space improvements, but some of that included, permanent changes to that building. So we had the letter of support from that private property owner. I think that should answer that. Next question, will the slides be made available? Yes, so we are recording this right now. The recording will be made available. And then I can, I'm not sure if I'll be sending the slides via email and a follow-up email to you guys, or if I'll be making them available on the website. But yes, I can definitely make the physical slides available. But the recording will be on our YouTube. Next question. Oh, somebody is letting me know that the link to the scoring rubric on the was broken. So I will definitely make sure that is fixed when we get off of this. If your institution is able to provide a larger percentage of cost share, will that make our application more competitive? That's a very good question that I think I might need to ponder a little bit more. Obviously, in looking at the applications, the selection committee, one of those criterias, of course, I'm not going to remember the exact wording right off the top of my head, but one of the criteria is about, evaluating how likely the project will be completed and the success of that. So if you are submitting an application where you're providing a larger in-kind share and match than the requested 10%, that would surely reflect to I would assume, to the selection committee that your organization is very committed and in a position to successfully complete this project on the timeline. So again, I don't think it's necessarily that because you have more money, you'll be graded better. It's more that it just adds to the complete picture that you will be able to successfully complete this project within the terms of the program. Because we've certainly awarded Heritage Fund grants to organizations that don't have any money in-house, or don't have, don't keep money. They, accept donations, they pay for their things, but aren't necessarily having money in the bank on the regular. And we've awarded projects, and those projects have successfully been completed. Next question, can we utilize funds to support a paid internship leading towards the completion of a project that falls in one of the categories or buckets? Yes, definitely. You can apply for that. But again, I think it's important to remember that this is not an operation fund grant program. We cannot award money to just pay your salary, to pay for new computers, for the supplies that you need, the daily regular operation. If you need to hire an intern or a full-time staff person to complete the project that you're doing, that payroll and that money can be included in your application for sure. But if it's just, we need an intern for the year, that's not going to be an eligible project, a successful project through this grant program. An example, there was a previous awardee that was doing an inventory of sorts of their collection and updating, I think it was the oral history collection. And so as part of that, I'm not sure if they hired a new intern or staff person, or if it was someone already on the payroll, but there was new dedicated staff time that needed to go to that couldn't be afforded otherwise. So like that staff time on that project was eligible, but just staff time in general is not eligible. I hope that makes sense. Oh, and that's the last question. Thank you, Jennifer. Let's see. Please, any more questions, put them into the Q&A. I'm just taking a look at the chat to see if there are any other questions. I see this comment here in the chat box about creating a public exhibit about innovation. I mean, from what I just quickly reviewing here, I do think that project would meet eligibility, and again, would technically be probably an education and research bucket one. But yeah, I think just from the little bit that you put in there about your project, Peggy, I think that would be eligible, creating that exhibit. But you can certainly shoot me an email with details, and we can make sure. And then again, there's another follow-up comment about the question previously asked about the boat not owned by the nonprofit, owned by a private person. Again, if you nonprofit or government have a project that involves a specific resource that is not owned by you, that private property owner needs to have a letter of support in your application. And again, as far as that grading and competitiveness and evaluation of your application, public access to this funding is something that the selection committee finds important. So again, it's fine if it is privately owned, but you need to pay attention in your application to point how, while it's privately owned, this funding would support the public access to this and support the public awareness, however that frames for you. And I think that is the last question in here. I'll give another a minute or two in case there are more questions. Yes, there's more questions. So this question is about if the resource is in Maryland versus not in Maryland. Again, I think Ted, for your questions about this project, I think we might need to have a phone call or an email just to go through, just because it is such an interesting case involving a water vessel and the situations of their project. So definitely let's connect offline to answer some more specific questions. But generally, Preservation Maryland, Maryland Historical Trust, the projects that we award through the Heritage Fund need to be in Maryland. There have been instances where the organization might not be a Maryland-based organization, but the project is in Maryland and it was funded. For example, I think a few years ago, there was a project that involved cemeteries, and the organization that applied was a veteran organization that was based, I think, in DC or Virginia. But the project was dealing with cemeteries that were in Maryland and whatnot. So again, that's fine, but it's only projects that live and are in Maryland that we support. If the repairs or the work is being done somewhere else, I mean, that's fine, but the improvement that we're supporting needs to be in Maryland. But again, Ted, let's connect separately to discuss some more of the finer points to make sure that we're all good on that. With that, again, I'll wait one more minute in case there's any other last questions. But with that, we're at the end of our program. Please reach out. If you have any questions, you can see my email there, respond to the confirmation email that you got for this event, attend those office hours if you have questions. And I look forward to seeing your applications and hopefully seeing your projects awarded. So again, thank you so very much for joining us tonight. And with that, have a great rest of your night.